Hello and welcome to Euromonitor International's coronavirus podcast series, discussing the impact of COVID 19 on industries, economies, and consumers. Today, I'm joined by Caroline Bremner, Euromonitor's head of travel research, and we'll be discussing the move from sustainability to purpose in travel. Caroline, how are you today?
Hi, Pete. Yeah, I'm doing really well. How are you?
Doing good. It's a rainy day here in Chicago, but spring is on its way, so I'm feeling optimistic.
Yes, we have some sunshine here in the UK, so yes, same here.
Good, good, good. So, like I said, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this move from sustainability to purpose in travel, um, but kind of recapping how badly COVID hit the sector. I mean, it's really no secret, right, that travel and tourism has been decimated by the pandemic. It's left communities starved of income and jobs. However, on the flip side of that, we're seeing that nature has kind of flourished. There's been no crowds, there's been no, or at least less pollution. So when people start to travel again, how do we ensure that travel can open up in a sustainable way that benefits people, planet, and create prosperity?
That's a great point, and we definitely know that the pandemic has cast a very long shadow over the travel and tourism sector. It's also exposed the fragility that we can see in our societies. We have seen the levels of deaths and COVID cases, which has caused so much sorrow and pain. And then on top of that, we also have the fact that many businesses, particularly travel and hospitality businesses, have been closed, or have been put on furlough. There's been restructuring, and that in itself is a massive social and economic burden for many families around the world. And I think what we can see from the pandemic is that pre-pandemic we had this massive focus on the environment, and there was a growing sort of consumer interest in climate change, the anti-plastics movement. And then with the pandemic and COVID hitting last year, we could actually see this sort of groundswell of interest in the social side of sustainability, and that was really elevated. And we saw, communities, families, and friends coming together to help each other, and there was that altruism and compassion for one another. And so when we've now got some new data, which is literally launched this week from our consumer lifestyle survey, and we can see that the pandemic has really shifted the dial in consumers and their awareness and interest in wanting to have a positive impact on the environment through their daily actions. So that has actually increased bit over last year to this year, and 65% continue to remain concerned about climate change. That hasn't altered during this year of COVID. And if anything, we see consumers sort of really putting their money where their mouth is, and increasingly buying from brands that align with their values. And again, we saw this increase over year to year. So now 31% of consumers globally say it's very important to buy from brands that are aligned with their beliefs and clearly their values. So we can see that consumers are very on board. They understand, they accept that there is a challenge with climate change and that requires climate action, and even at that individual level. But there's also this immense, issue that we're all facing. And is that individual sort of action enough? And so when I speak to people in the travel industry, they can see that consumers are on board. But there's also, with the pause that we had in the industry, a real sense of, taking advantage of this disruption. And when we do rebuild, when we begin to open up again, that purpose is really at the heart of the recovery and the rebuilding in the sector. And this means that we have to take a much more holistic approach to travel and tourism, to its impacts, and equally align more with consumer expectations because they are holding companies to account. They are, also boycotting companies that don't act in a way that they feel is the right way. So when we look to rebuilding travel and tourism, it needs to transition and transform into a purpose driven business model that's fit for purpose, that puts people, the planet, biodiversity, and the environment at the heart of it. And with that, that is the best foot forward for the industry.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about building back better. In fact, I know it was one of Euromonitor's global consumer trends for this year, 2021. I'm curious what you know about destinations adapting and rebuilding their strategies post pandemic.
Well, we're not out of the woods yet. So we see that, countries around the world continue to be have travel bans and restrictions in place. We know that the pandemic is not fully yet under control, despite the very successful discovery of the various vaccines and also the speed of the vaccination programs that are being rolled out at various speeds around the world. So we are still in the midst of this pandemic, and 2021 will be very much characterized in the same way that 2020 was. And so the first default, once things begin to settle down with the cases and the deaths and the progress that's being made with the vaccine, we'll see opening up of domestic and local tourism where that's possible. And then equally we'll see those key priority corridors being established, and everything will be sort of based on the status of the virus in each country. And equally, we're seeing moves to having, for example, the IATA travel pass. We've got the EU digital green pass, which will also help, using technology and digitalization to facilitate travel. And of course, we know that, we talked about this already, but even before the pandemic, there was this enormous sea change in attitudes towards the environment, but also specifically to travel and tourism. There was this anti overcrowding, this movement against mass tourism, that volume driven business model. And of course, we also saw the emergence of different types of tourism emerge, such as transformative travel, conscious travel, or the regenerative travel and tourism that's been pioneered by Anna Pollock, who has been working with destinations such as Flanders in Belgium and then Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and along with countries like New Zealand. And when you think about regenerative travel and tourism, central to that is taking a holistic view of the positive and negative impacts of travel and tourism. So very much putting communities and those natural living systems at the core of everything. And one very interesting example that we've seen is, factoring into the equation just how happy are and on board are residents in a particular destination. So we see, for example, in Costa Rica, they have the Social Progress Index, or we have New Zealand's Living Standards Index, so that they can keep track of how the population feels towards the way that tourism is being developed and managed in their country. So I think that's a really important case study. And we also know that with sustainable travel, it's sort of bigger and broader than your traditional ecotourism or your eco lodge. It also encompasses elements of adventure travel, outdoors, immersion in nature, immersion in local culture and communities. community based tourism, such as we see in the Caribbean. And it spans also every aspect of the value chain from food supply right the way through to energy use and keeping track of your carbon footprint. And of course, the benefits, those very tangible benefits to local communities in terms of job creation, in terms of prosperity, quality of living, education, diversity in the workforce. So, we have to have that truly holistic view of travel and tourism and its benefits. And interestingly, last year we saw lots of groups coming together. So we had the sort of the non-profits coming together under the Future of Tourism Coalition, led by the likes of the Travel Foundation and Crest. And they came together to speak with one voice and to really sort of drive that message home about the need for sustainability. And Euromonitor has actually become a signatory of the Future of Tourism Coalition and their 13 guiding principles. I'm not going to sort of walk you through all of the principles, but it is very much about seeing that big picture, using sustainability standards, whether that's from the Global Sustainable Tourism Council or bodies like that. Equally, a very important message is choosing quality over quantity. And I think we are very much seeing travel through a very different lens after the pandemic. It's almost like a paradigm shift to value creation. And of course, it's important to reduce, those negative climate impacts. We need to also ensure that we're not overly dependent on specific source markets, and diversity and diversifying is really important. So those are just some of those criteria. Equally, we also have this ongoing shift in the sector with more companies becoming B Corp registered. So they're legally signing up to be evaluated on very strict environmental and social governance criteria. We also have the likes of Intrepid. They are leading in terms of B Corp, but they're going even one step further and actually adopting science based targets. And also, they're taking a very collaborative approach and sharing their best practices on decarbonisation in a very open way. So they're sharing those insights with others, which is, truly great that there's that sort of sense of we're all in this together. And then also we had the Tourism Declares Climate Emergency initiative that was launched just before the pandemic really took hold. And countries such as Scotland have signed up for this. And of course, Scotland and Glasgow being the host of COP26 later in this year, there's this growing momentum that we have to act now to make those commitments to achieve the 17 sustainable development goals and to really reduce global warming and then ultimately pivot to a circular and net zero economy.
So I wanted to ask about the Sustainable Travel Index that Euromonitor recently launched at ITB Berlin. Can you share a little bit about what the index is and some key insights from that research?
Sure. So we were really delighted to share our latest index, which is a brand new piece of research at ITB Berlin. We looked at 99 countries through a sustainability lens. First of all, we broke everything down into 7 key pillars. So we assessed all these countries in terms of their environmental, social, economic sustainability, their country risk, along with their sustainable tourism demand, transport, and lodging. And not surprisingly, we found European countries were in the top 10, and the number one country was Sweden. So this is not surprising considering that Europe has a very strong emphasis on sustainability, digital transformation through its Green New Deal. And this is very much aligned with the 2030 UN agenda, the Paris Agreement, and equally, aiming to be carbon zero by 2050. So, what I really liked was when we looked at each pillar individually, and took a deep dive into each one, the greater the diversity of countries you found. So, for example, when we looked at the environmental pillar, we saw a variety of African and Latin American countries like Mozambique, Tanzania, Costa Rica, and Peru. While, for example, when we looked at social sustainability, Eastern Europe appeared very much in the top rankings. And then, for example, when we looked at sustainable tourism demand, so making sure that there was a good balance between, creating value for local communities and having a balanced mix between international versus domestic tourism, there we saw the likes of Iceland, Norway, Australia, and New Zealand. And then when it came to things like economic sustainability through, having a balanced economy, including travel and tourism and hospitality, the number one country there was Hong Kong. So, as I say, it was very interesting to go through this process with the research team and the analytics team at Euromonitor, and of course launch that and share those insights with everybody in the industry. And of course, we couldn't have done it without our partners, such as Greenview, who provided some really excellent sustainability metrics on lodging, including water waste, energy, carbon footprint. And then, of course, some advice from key experts such as Harold Goodwin and also the Travel Foundation.
So it sounds kind of like what you're saying is that there's a growing positive momentum from consumers, but also some positive momentum from governments and businesses. Does that suggest we're in a good position, or?
Well, we didn't go that far, but I do remain cautiously optimistic. And I think we talked about that at the beginning. It is springtime, so there is that sense of hope, renewal, regeneration. But then, the reality of the situation is that travel and tourism as a sector, everything remains very precarious for many. We hope that there won't be many more global waves of the pandemic, but there might be. And of course, there's the unpredictability of the virus, the fact that there are new variants out there. And also, we have the challenges of ramping up the vaccination rollout and making sure that it gets to all the right people at the right time. However, all going well, there is this hope and expectation that that we will see more opening up in the next few months, particularly before the summer in the northern hemisphere. And there is that sense as well that we can't return to that volume driven model of old. We have to resist the lure of volume growth, and the focus has to be on driving quality and value, because ultimately we cannot. Return to overcrowding, too many people descending on these very fragile destinations. So the genie is really out of the bottle with consumers and residents awareness of the negative impacts of tourism. So yes, we all saw the drops in pollution, less, no planes, less transport, less commuting, and then that positive sort of response, enjoying clean air, thriving wildlife and nature. So it's no longer possible to ignore this. And of course, if something's broken, you need to fix it. So there is this sense that travel businesses need to, focus and double down on bridging that gap between their sustainability commitments to climate change and to their staff, their employees, and the local communities that they operate in. and also develop in line with consumer expectations those sustainable products that we know are really resonating. And I think there's definitely a demand for that. Um, Equally, it's about being business and climate smart. Countries like Costa Rica put it really nicely when they say that they basically are concerned that if they don't go down this sustainable transformation, they risk their competitive advantage. They risk damaging their reputation. And it's actually protecting their natural and cultural assets, looking after their communities, the environment and biodiversity that's really going to give them the edge and make them continue to be attractive to visitors. And this is true for every country. You have to look at your unique offer. Every destination has its own people, its own culture, its own places that are truly special, and of course their own beautiful areas and locations to enjoy biodiversity and nature. And of course, that is fundamental to experience. So, if anything, for me, sustainability is the only way to elevate the visitor experience and ultimately make those fundamental emotional connections between people. And for me, that is the way forward.
Well, thanks, Caroline. I feel a little bit more optimistic coming into spring and hearing all this. Thanks so much for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for tuning into this podcast. Remember, you can find all of our coronavirus research at euromonitor.com/coronavirus.